Hi everyone, welcome to the April 19th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and we are taking a look back at last weekend's racing around the country, focusing primarily on Keeneland, where they ran a couple of Grade 1 events on the turf last weekend, the Maker's Mark on Friday, the Jenny Wiley for the Fillies and Mares on Saturday. Also on that Saturday card was the final Kentucky Derby prep, the Grade 3 Lexington. We'll see if that race has any serious implications on the Kentucky Derby. We did some handicapping of that last weekend, looked like a wide open race and kind of played out that way on the racetrack. So we'll talk about that, some of the other stakes that took place at Keeneland last week, including a couple of maiden special weights that achieved some higher TimeformUS speed figures we'll discuss as well. Then we'll move on to Laurel Park, where last year's Eclipse Award champion Jackie's Warrior returned in the Count Fleet. At Aqueduct, there was a turf stakes last weekend on Saturday, and then we'll finish things up at Laurel and Santa Anita. They ran a quartet of stakes races on Saturday at Laurel Park on the dirt, and at Santa Anita there was a big speed figure earned by a former Bob Baffert trainee at the maiden special weight that we'll discuss at the end of the podcast. Craig, excuse my raspy voice as we begin this podcast. I've been a little bit under the weather over the weekend, feeling okay now, just kind of have a lingering lower tone to my voice, so sorry to the listeners about that, but we saw some good racing this past weekend.
Yeah, we did. I thought it was really good racing at Keeneland, both on Friday and Saturday, and I was actually really surprised by that Laurel card. Some horses showed up that they were on the radar just a little bit, but ran some races, and when I went to do the rundown, I was surprised too. We don't generally include 4 races from Laurel Park, but I thought they were all interesting in their own right.
Yeah, we'll talk about those a little bit later in the show, but I agree with you. Those were some interesting races to watch and could be some horses that are worth following moving forward. But let's start things off at Keeneland and talk about some of the graded stakes that took place there last weekend, beginning with the 2 from Saturday. Let's start with that Derby prep, Craig, the Lexington. I thought this race, watching it, was a little bit underwhelming. I know it got a decent speed figure. Tawny Port, who was a surprising 5-1 in this race, didn't take that much money for the Brad Cox barn. He did win this one, but felt like a race where a lot of major players just didn't really show up with their best efforts.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of this race. Of course, it's only at 1 1/16, so if any of these horses go to the Derby, they're stretching out another 1.5 furlongs. Some of them have run 1 1/8 before, like the winner, Tawny Port, who had in his last 2 tries. And I thought he ran a decent race. Does it make him a Derby contender? I would say probably not. I did note that we have the day carded in dark blue, saying that speed was not very good, but admittedly I haven't went back and reviewed that to see if I agree with that algorithm on that day, but he certainly closed well, looked pretty good doing it, and I thought Major General, the runner-up, who had really thrown in a clunker in his return race as a 3-year-old, ran just as good, if not better, than the winner. He's actually going to get a 116 speed figure compared to the 115 the winner gets because of setting a pretty decent pace, a really solid pace in here. So I thought they ran well. For me, it's kind of hard to take them seriously as Derby contenders. So.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, it's nice to see Tawny Port kind of back up that speed figure that he earned on synthetic last time in the Jeff Ruby Stakes and do it on the dirt. That's good for him heading into the Kentucky Derby, where I imagine he will participate now. But he's going to have to do a little bit better if he's going to be considered a major player in that race. I guess the big disappointment in the Lexington was In Due Time, who was bet down to 9-5 favoritism. Kind of surprising to see anybody be such a clear choice in this race, but the bettors really went for him. He just didn't really have much kick. I thought got a decent trip, saving ground on the inside, whereas Tawny Port was wide most of the way. And I mean, he had to negotiate a little bit of kickback in traffic, but I didn't think In Due Time had a major excuse.
No, I'm not as big a fan of those Florida races as some other people are. We'll see how it turns out, but this guy didn't run particularly well, for sure. I didn't really have any excuses for me.
Yeah, and as for that blue color-coded race rating box indicating the track favoring closers, I would imagine, Craig, that that's due in large part to the results that we saw in the 2 allowance races that bookended this late pick 5 sequence. Both of them were upset by 20-1 shots that came from off the pace. One of them, Eben, in the first leg that I know we had handicapped on the forecast last week. I don't think we even mentioned that horse. He was a bit of a surprise getting back to form. And then at the end of the day with Awesome Jerry coming from off the pace to win, also at 20-1 for Safi Joseph. I would imagine that really influenced that algorithm spitting out that blue color coding.
Yeah, and as I was looking through the charts, and by the way, congrats, great call on Awesome Jerry. It's not a race we're going to talk about, but anytime you tab a 20-1 winner, got to give you some credit there. But as I look back through the charts, Speed just didn't do particularly well. There was one horse who sat just off the pace and was able to win, but he was 4-5, so that one's not weighed too heavily. And, I'll have to watch the races, but Speed definitely did not do very well, and there were plenty of dirt races on Saturday.
The Grade 1 event on Saturday was the Jenny Wiley going 1.16 on the turf course for the fillies and mares, and Chad Brown continued his run of dominance in this race as his two fillies finished first and second. No real surprise there. Regal Glory did go off as the slight favorite at even money over Shantasara at 6-5, and that's the way they finished. A length apart, but well ahead of the rest of the field.
Yeah, no real surprise here. I'll have to say this was one in the betting. The whole way through, Shantasara was hanging around 4-5 and even money, and Regal Glory was 8-5. And I won't say I was dumb enough, because I did wind up cashing, but I thought she was a big overlay at that price. But the computer bettors got in and wound up making her the favorite after the running. I just thought she had a little bit of a tactical edge, and the odds discrepancy was silly. But she ran a good race. I'm glad they didn't retire her. She's getting a 124 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort. Shantasara got a 122. Nobody else really ran much of note to even bother discussing. But I thought they both ran very well. And if they were to run back, I would have to see the field, of course. But I still tend to think Shantasara might be a little bit better filly. She just had a tougher trip. Not really that she had a tough trip, but Regal Glory just had that tactical edge with so little speed in the field.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference between these two is distance, which you were kind of getting at on the forecast last week. I think Regal Glory is a miler that can stretch out to the 1.16 as she did here, but she's really better just, as that flat 1 mile distance, whereas Shantasara, she won the 1 3/8 Jockey Club Oaks last year. She's probably a horse that could target a race like the New York going 1 1/4, which I believe is a Grade 1 this year at Belmont next time. So I think that they can stretch out Shantasara in distance a little bit, and they'll probably target different races moving forward, assuming that both of these fillies and mares stay healthy for the rest of the year. But like you were saying, Regal Glory, she's just in great form right now. She's won 4 of her last 5 starts. Kind of been a horse that over the past couple of seasons, she's been overshadowed by some stablemates in the Chad Brown barn. Going back to 2019, I think she trailed home 3 or 4 Chad Brown horses in the QE2 when they tried her against Grade 1 company for the first time. But after that, she was beaten by Newspaper of Record a couple times in 2020. But she really moved forward last season. It seems like now as a 6-year-old in 2022, she's really just firing on all cylinders. She's got improved tactical speed, which gave her the edge over Shantasara here because she was able to get the jump on that foe and still produce that kick in the final quarter mile. So she's just doing really well right now, and I think she's going to be pretty tough looking ahead to a race like the Just a Game on Belmont Day. Let's move on to the other Grade 1 event at Keeneland this past weekend, also on the turf, the Maker's Mark Mile. This one took place on Friday. Going that 1 mile distance looked like a pretty competitive race on paper. That first-time import from Europe for Chad Brown Mason did take a lot of money, but it was the 50-1 morning line, bet down to 9-1 by the public, Cheryl Spite, who caused the minor upset, getting up to win this one for Roger Atfield.
Yeah, I talked about that morning line. That almost had to be a typo, I would think. I don't see any way you could look at those PPs and see 50-1. The horse had been in really good form, won both races. I believe it was Tampa where he won that stakes race with good speed figures. So I'm not saying he was the most likely winner by any means, but something just seemed off there. And Cheryl Spate ran great again. I've got a 123 TimeformUS speed figure, which tells you how good a form Regal Glory's in, that she was able to run even a point higher than the Colts. And this was a really good competitive race, which is what you expect from a Grade 1, but not something that we always get in this country. And I thought the top 4 or 5 finishers all ran pretty good races. They all got 120. Matter of fact, I think the whole field in here got a 120 or better speed figure. And Cheryl Spate just came flying out of nowhere, was able to run them all down. And it's not like the pace was crazy fast in here. It was just kind of solid throughout. it might have picked up around the turn, that last turn, and gave him a little bit of an edge, but he got the job done, just barely nosing out Mason on the wire, who obviously ran really well in his North American debut.
Yeah, I'm thinking that morning line probably is not a typo. I know the morning line maker at Keeneland loves to use the 50-1, probably more than I do, and I use it pretty liberally compared to a lot of other line makers. So sometimes you just have your palette that you're going to paint with, and you use the wrong color for a certain horse, and that might have just been an oversight with Charles Spite. But yeah, I mean, he was coming into this race in great form, as you said. He's now 3 for 3 on the season, having won that race at Tampa last time, and he's just really stepped forward. He's a horse that showed so much promise at the start of his career when he achieved those first couple of victories, I think on turf and synth up at Woodbine. We didn't really know what he was at that time, but it's taken him a while to come around since then, but he seems to really be doing well now as a 5-year-old. This is a horse that you could really trace back on the dam side. Charles Fipke, the breeder and owner, has bred a lot of these horses. His dam sire, Perfect Soul, the dam herself, who was a good racehorse. So nice to see those homebreds get rewarded, and Charles Spite definitely delivered a nice performance here. Mason, good effort, first time in the country, and got to give a shout out to the third place finisher, Smooth Like Straight, who I think this was the 5th time in the past year that Smooth Like Straight lost a grade 1 race by a half length or less. He's always there at the end. He just doesn't always come out on the winning end.
Yeah, and that's something I guess you got to keep an eye on. I mean, he was beaten a half length in the Breeders' Cup Mile, so he's obviously got a lot of ability, but he just doesn't have that strong finishing kick. I mean, he's won grade 1s before. He won the Shoemaker out in California. But for the most part, he's a horse who, if you got a good turn of foot, generally someone's going to run him down. So he just always seems to be overbet for me. But really good horse, you'd love to own. Got to be frustrating to come so close so often.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty high-quality race overall. We're not going to really go into some of the horses that finished in behind. I didn't think anybody had a significant trip here, but it's not like there was a whole lot of separation from first to last in this race. I thought Count, again, might like the longer stretch at Keeneland a bit more than what he gets in California. He just got too far back, and the pace, while it was moderate throughout. I don't think you wanted to be closing from way back in the pack. Charles Spite was really the only horse to make up significant ground in the lane. So we didn't see the race really play into the favor of a deep closer like that. But, I could see that with trips reversing or a different complexion of the field, there being a completely different result with the same group of horses next time. They seem pretty evenly matched.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, you won't see a field where every horse ran a 120 or over very often. And it was, as you noted, less than 3 lengths from first to last.
Let's briefly head back to Saturday's card at Keeneland, where another stakes race that they ran was the Giants Causeway, a little bit earlier in the card, going 5.5 furlongs for the fillies and mares on the turf. And Craig, we, to varying degrees on the forecast last week, tried to maybe poke some holes in Campanelle, look for some other ways to go, but it all proved for naught, as she was just much the best in her return as a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I'll admit I used her with some trepidation. It didn't work out as I didn't hit the pick 4 anyway, but yeah, she looked a winner every step of the way. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. If you were watching her closely throughout the race, she was just moving so comfortable for Irad Ortiz, and I basically conceded the race to her before they even hit the turn. The only way she was losing was if she got pinned in somehow, but she didn't. She ran a 1:19 TimeformUS speed figure, which is really nice for her return race, and we'll be interested to see where she shows up. I know she spent a lot of time overseas, and I imagine she may be heading back there.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, previously in her career, her preps in the U.S. had been a little bit lackluster compared to some of her overseas performances, like in the Commonwealth Cup and the Queen Mary when she was a 2-year-old. She had really stepped forward when she went over to Europe. So if she does the same thing this year off this performance, that's scary how well she could run when she tries. I believe it's going to be the Platinum Jubilee going 6 furlongs at Royal Ascot. I think Wesley Ward has the male horse, Golden Pal, slated to run in the King's Stam, which is the 5 furlong race that begins that 5-day meet. And I think Campanelle's going to run a little bit later, so it'll be interesting to see both of them perform over there. But like you said, she just looked like a winner every step of the way. Irad Ortiz rode her with a ton of confidence, not even really worrying that much about saving ground. He didn't mind going wide coming off the far turn, just pretty much relying on her being the best horse, which she was. I thought that John Velasquez gave Star Divine a great trip to be the runner-up here. It probably would have been a winning trip without a horse like Campanelle in the race, just not quite able to get it done because she really didn't have the late finish to go with that filly late, but I thought that she was the second best horse in here and got a great ride in doing it. Maybe there was some slight trouble for those in behind, going good and to briefly steady on the backstretch. I think Change of Control and Jouster were a little bit farther back than you might have expected them, but it's not like any of those were ever going to beat the winner.
No, they weren't. Jouster definitely had some trouble at the start. And some horses, you just got to make a note. A horse like LZ, she's just better at the fairgrounds. I know we talked about it on the forecast, but she still took some pretty significant money here and had no real excuses to finish fifth.
On Friday at Keeneland, Wesley Ward once again dominated a turf sprint stakes race as the 3-year-old fillies went in the Limestone Stakes, going that same 5.5 furlong distance, but it was the other Ward runner, Ruthin, who was coming off a layoff, like the heavily bet Her World. Both of these horses returning for their first starts as a 3-year-old, but Her World took all the money with Irad Ortiz aboard, but it was Ruthin who was a little bit quicker away from the gate, got to slow down the pace a bit, and she was able to hold them off in the stretch.
Yeah, it's Wesley Ward's dangerous when he sends these multiple horses out. Sometimes the public gets carried away on one and forgets the other, and I think that's what happened with Ruthin here. People, maybe they forgot. She debuted early in her 2-year-old season, way back in April. Ran a 91 figure. I mean, if you project that out to this year, and there was no reason to think she wouldn't mature and improve, because that's what Wesley Ward does with these horses, she predicted to be really strong in this field, and she did it. She ran a really nice race, got a 105 speed figure for the effort, and just another in the seemingly endless list of Wesley Ward turf sprinters that's going to be dangerous wherever she shows up.
Yeah, do have to give a shout out to the runner-up here, Derrynane, who was the only horse to make up significant ground in this race, like I was kind of alluding to. This race did not feature a whole lot of pace. I think all of the TimeformUS pace figures are color-coded in blue, so that did favor Ruthin, who was able to get to the front and kind of secure that lead by herself, as once Her World was outbroken, Irad Ortiz pretty much took her in hand and conceded the lead to his Wesley Ward trained stablemate, and that worked against a horse like Derrynane, who's got to come from the back of the pack, but she was really flying at the end of this race, just basically ran out of ground.
Yeah, and you're not going to see many turf sprints with the all blue colored fractions like you'll see in here. Some of that probably, as you said, because the top 2 horses were stablemates. But yeah, Derrynane was absolutely flying. She had run a good speed figure last year, 104 to finish up in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint, and didn't quite get there here. But with that kind of, with a better pace, she's obviously going to be dangerous. And I would assume Christophe Clement's going to send her to New York, where the distances in the turf sprints get a little bit longer, and that should be right up her alley.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And also, Derrynane is a New York bred, so that gives them plenty of options for where to run her in the future. There are some turf sprint stakes restricted to state breds in New York in the coming months, so she could probably clean up there, given the way that she's run against open company in her last couple of starts. Before we move away from Keeneland, let's talk about a couple other maiden special weight races from this past weekend, both from Saturday's card. On the turf, early in the day on Saturday, they ran a maiden special weight for the 3-year-olds, won by the Calumet bred and owned Double Clutch, going out for Rusty Arnold. And I thought this horse took a pretty nice step forward off his debut, Craig, reversing the decision with Growth Capital, as both of these horses were coming out of a similar race at Gulfstream Park, but Double Clutch was the one that really moved forward from that debut.
Yeah, that's looking like a pretty strong race at Gulfstream. None of the horses have come back to win yet, except for Double Clutch, but there have been some good performances. And Double Clutch got a really nice 109 TimeformUS speed figure for this win. The pace was pretty solid, the half mile coded in red, and he was right up there on the pace, just a couple lengths off of it. And yeah, I thought he ran a really good race. It was, not one of the typical close finishes in a turf race. He was pulling away from the closers at the end, so big effort from him.
Yeah, he did get a great trip and ride from Corey Lanerie. He was on the rail almost the entire way, and you do have the option of pulling that trip when you draw post number 2 and your main rival, who was Growth Capital, draws post number 12. So ground loss definitely made up some of the difference between these two, as Growth Capital was forced to go 2 to 3 wide most of the way, but you had to like the way the double clutch burst through between horses at the top of the stretch and really displayed a nice turn of foot. He's got a Calumet pedigree on the top and the bottom because he's sired by Optimizer, who was campaigned by Calumet Farm, I believe trained by D. Wayne Lucas back in the day. Optimizer was a very good turf horse. I don't think he's sired too many runners overall, but seems like he's got a good one here. And on the dam side, Double Clutch, he's a half brother to Gear Jockey, who's a pretty nice horse, also for Rusty Arnold and Calumet Farm. So that one's more of a sprinting type, but it seems like Double Clutch might want to go a little bit farther. Not a bad run from Growth Capital in second, like I said, with losing a little bit of ground on the turns, but it just seemed like Double Clutch took the bigger step forward out of their respective debuts.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to give up on Growth Capital. He definitely had a little bit of an excuse, ran a good 106 speed figure. So I think this was another strong race, that Gulfstream race and this one. And I think we're going to see more than a few horses break their maiden out of this one.
Speaking of live maiden special weight races from Gulfstream Park, we saw another horse coming out of a different one of those a little bit later in the day on Saturday. Another maiden special weight winner as the Brad Cox trained the Todd Pletcher trained, those white bridles confused me, Under Oath, came back out of a third place finish in his Gulfstream debut to win his second start here at Keeneland, beating the Chad Brown firster Artorias. I think each of the top 2 runners are promising sorts.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they both look good to me. 107 TimeformUS speed figure for the winner, 103 for Artorias back in second, and I think, he had a pretty wide trip in there. I'm sure he learned a little something, and yeah, this is another strong race, and I have to note, Under Oath comes out of that Unicky maiden special weight at Gulfstream Park, which has just been sending out, winners coming back out of that one left and right. I believe he was the 4th one already to come out of that race, and we haven't seen the winner Unicky return yet.
Yeah, the runner-up from that Gulfstream maiden race, Cape Trafalgar, came back earlier in the week at Keeneland, and this race didn't make the rundown, but we should probably mention it briefly on April 14th, which would have been Thursday of last week at Keeneland. The 9th race, the maiden special weight, got a 114 TimeformUS speed figure for the winner, Brigadier General, a horse that had plenty of races under his belt already, but seemed like he really stepped forward, and that's a very fast speed figure for 3-year-olds in a maiden special weight event in April of their 3-year-old season. So another race that you might want to watch some horses come out of in the future. So definitely a maiden special weight at Gulfstream that came up fast and has produced some fast performances since then. And Under Oath, just one of many to come out of there that could be worth following. But Craig, the runner-up Artorias, that first-time starter for Chad Brown and Juddmonte Stable, he also ran pretty well. Was one of many closers that did well on that Saturday card at Keeneland. But he really put in a nice late run and looks like one that might want a little bit more ground in the future as a son of Arrogate.
Yeah, I was wondering. I was going to ask you if you thought, because he didn't look like a sprinter to me, though he ran fine, and without running into the winner, he probably wins first out, but he did seem like one who would want more ground to me.
Yeah, Artorias is out of a dam, Paulus Silver Lining, who is a multiple Grade 1 winner sprinting on the dirt, but those progeny of Arrogate seems like more distance and time really has suited them, so we'll see if Artorias is able to take a step forward from here. Already looks like he could be one of the better Arrogates that we've seen, as aside from Secret Oath, it's not like his progeny have been doing too much on the racetrack as of yet. Let's move on to our next venue, Oaklawn Park, from this past weekend. The big race there was the Count Fleet on Saturday, featuring the return of last year's Eclipse Award-winning sprinter Jackie's Warrior. And Craig, I've got to say, I did not see this race live. I looked up the result and the chart before I watched it. And when I saw the chart and the margin of victory, I kind of sighed to myself and said, oh, Jackie's Warrior came back and was a little disappointing. Then I went back and watched the race and kind of was left with a different impression, because watching the race visually, Jackie's Warrior never looked like a loser, traveled well throughout, got a real challenge early. There were things to like about this performance.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When I watched the race, I mean, I knew he ran pretty well, but I didn't think he ran as well as the number indicated. Just because of how Let's Get Lucky made that late run, I guess, closed up the margin. Even though, as you said, I think Jackie's Warrior and Joel Rosario had the race in hand. I was not expecting a 129 Timeform US speed figure. Now, 5 points of that is because of the quick pace he set early, and he was challenged early for the lead by Empire of Gold, that really fast horse we've talked about on the show a few times before. But, as always, Oaklawn is nothing but dirt. It was a sloppy track, so maybe that influenced it a little bit, but I thought it was a really good effort, and it matched some of the numbers he ran late in his 3-year-old season, even early. I mean, he was fast all along, but it shows he is going to be a force to be reckoned with in this sprint division.
Yeah, and I could already hear some people saying, how does Jackie's Warrior get a 129 when Speaker's Corner a couple of weeks ago and the Carter only got a 126 or 127 for that visually impressive win when people weren't visually impressed by Jackie's Warrior on Saturday. But the numbers are the numbers, and this race did feature a much faster pace than that Carter did, if you're going to cherry pick that as the one to compare to. Maybe people aren't saying that. I'm just giving them an idea to criticize the speed figures right now. But no, Jackie's Warrior, I was impressed with what I saw, because that horse, Empire of Gold, is pretty fast. That he really took a strong shot at Jackie's Warrior early. They really opened up on the rest of the field. I don't think that Steve Asmussen was expecting to get that kind of challenge in the early stages of this race. And Jackie's Warrior, he handled it pretty well. To me, it always looked like he had a little bit something left in reserve. Joel Rosario never really kind of went to the bottom of the well to make him find his best in here. So seems like a useful return. And let's remember, Jackie's Warrior was pretty underwhelming in his first start as a 3-year-old last year, also over a sloppy track at Oaklawn Park, and then took a big step forward subsequent to that. So I don't think it would be surprising if Jackie's Warrior is capable of better in subsequent starts. And we'll see where they decide to go. There are obviously a lot of options. A race like the Met Mile would be quite the affair if they decided to go for that with him. I'm sure that there are some other races going a little bit shorter that might be more appealing. But I thought this was a nice return for him.
Yeah, I will be interested to see where he shows up. I would imagine the Churchill Downs Stakes is a little too soon on Derby Day. So, yeah, I'm not sure where they're going to show up. I would like to see him stick to sprinting this year. He's a horse who ran some 130s last year, and I think he could easily beat that this year based on this return. I do worry about the mile if he showed up in a race like that, but we'll worry about that, cross that bridge when we get there. It was a good return. He ran fast, and it's always good to have a fast older horse come back because we don't have nearly enough of them.
Yeah, and I'll just say, the runner-up in this race, Let's Get Lucky, who got no respect on the tote board at 18-1, it's not like he had never run a fast race before. I mean, his races on the dirt, 3 and 4 back, those were speed figures of 115 and 118 that are not that far off the number that he got on Saturday at Oaklawn Park. So it's not like the number doesn't make sense for other horses in the race. It's just one that's worth watching moving forward, because Jackie's Warrior clearly was much the best. And the TimeformUS numbers will encapsulate how much better he ran than the horses who were second and third, given that pace bonus that he earned.
Yeah, and I have to throw in even Chip Off the Old Block, the third place finisher, had run some pretty quick races before. And he was the horse I actually bet in the straight exacta under Jackie's Warrior. And turning for home, I was counting my money, but it didn't work out that way.
One more race to mention from that Oaklawn Park card on Saturday was the race right before the Count Fleet, race 10, that was won by first-time starter Best Actor for Gary and Mary West and trainer Brad Cox. This horse, a son of Flatter, making his career debut, got plenty of company on the front end from Life on the Nile, as these two basically just turned it into a match race. They opened up on the rest of the field, battled all the way through the lane, and nice for the first-time starter Best Actor to turn away that more experienced foe in the late going.
Yeah, this effort really impressed me, particularly that it was his first career start, and he did so going around 2 turns. He ran a 110 speed figure for the effort. He, as you said, he didn't have it easy up front. He was facing some pretty good pressure from a horse who had run fast races before in Life on the Nile, and I don't know what the future holds for him, but that was a really nice debut.
Yeah, not a ton of pedigree on the dam side, though the second dam, Spun Sugar, she actually did win the Apple Blossom. She was a nice multiple grade one winner during her career. It's just, as a dam, Spun Sugar was a terrible producer. I've seen a lot of her progeny run in New York. I think she's standing in New York now, so she's had some New York breds running, and I mean, it's like she could not produce a runner to save her life, but one of her daughters did produce a pretty nice horse in Best Actor, so we'll see where he goes from here. But 110 TimeformUS speed figure is nothing to sneeze at for a first-time starter going a route distance. Let's move on to New York, Aqueduct this past weekend, where the one stakes race of note that they ran was the Plenty of Grace going a mile on the turf for the fillies and mares. Not the most deep field with only 4 runners signed on. The heavy favorite was the returning technical analysis for Chad Browd. And Craig, it just looked like technical analysis was maybe a little bit short coming off the layoff. And the fact that she got pressure on the front end from Alms and was forced to set a faster pace, it didn't help her late finish. And that allowed Plum Ali, who's had a perfect trip, to run by her in the stretch.
Yeah, it was a perfect trip, as you say, and it's kind of odd for a 4-horse field to get those red fractions like we have here, but it definitely set the race up. Plum Ali ran a nice 118 speed figure. Technical analysis actually got 2 points higher with a 120 for being part of that fast pace along with Alms. So I thought it was a good return from her. I definitely favor her coming out of this one, but it does show she's one that is a little vulnerable to pace pressure. She's done a lot of her... She's won her best race, the Lake Placid, on the lead, but that was over a yielding course. She's one that's been able to press a fast pace before, so I don't want to pigeonhole her as a speed horse is what I'm saying. She could probably adapt in a larger field, so I actually would go with the speed figures here, and I think she's a little bit better horse than Plum Ali.
Yeah, I would not disagree with that. Plum Ali has really blossomed since they've gotten a bit more aggressive with her. She went gate to wire when she won that race at the end of 2021. Obviously, it's not that hard to be aggressive in a 4-horse field, or I should say not that hard to be forwardly placed in a 4-horse field when you're not really going to have too many behind you, but Manny Franco did get her into the pocket here behind the 2 leaders, and as we were saying, she just really had everything work out for her. We'll see if technical analysis can turn the tables down the line if she gets into a race without another front runner. That's definitely a situation where she would be most dangerous. Let's move on to Laurel Park, where on Saturday they ran 4 stakes races on the dirt. Let's begin with a couple for the 3-year-olds. The Federico Tessio, a low-profile prep race for the Preakness. We'll see if it actually produces any starters for that race, but this is the local Maryland prep for the Preakness, and had a nice finish here as 2 Mike Trombetta train runners battled onto the wire, and it was the concisely named Joe who got the victory over Mr. Jefferson.
Concisely named. That is perfectly put. He's a horse. He wound up, I think he went off the favorite in here at 7-5. I know Shake 'em Loose was also bet some, but Joe ran fine. He's not going to be a real contender in the Preakness, but off that 102 speed figure. He ran a 105 last time, but yeah, it's just one of those names. I wanted to talk about this race because of his name and because he will most likely show up in the Preakness, but it would be a huge step forward, and it seems like he'd be more just race filler than anything.
It's kind of funny to me that the 2 horses were battling down to the wire. One is like a nickname, and the other one is a formal addressing Mr. Jefferson. Just a funny juxtaposition there. But Joe, yeah, I thought it was a game performance. He got a great trip. It's not like the pace was all that fast, and he was right on top of it. I actually thought Mr. Jefferson was going to roll by him because he was traveling well in hand coming to the top of the stretches. The only horse that was doing much running from the back of the pack, but Joe just wanted it a bit more through the lane. He held off Mr. Jefferson, who probably hung a little bit. Let's move on to the female version of this race, the Weber City Miss, going a little bit shorter, 1.16 miles, whereas the Federico Tessio was 1.125 miles. And Craig, this filly Luna Bell has just been the wonder horse of the winter and now into the spring at Maryland over the past 5 months or so. This was, I think, her 5th stakes win in a row. She's a Maryland bred. We'll see how far she can climb. I think they're going to try the Black-Eyed Susan next, but she just keeps winning.
Yeah, the winner gets entry into the Black Eyed Susan, and I would think this one would have more of a chance because I mean the Black Eyed Susan doesn't usually draw all that strong of a field like compared to a race like the Kentucky Oaks. She ran a career best 105 speed figure for this one, and it was her first time around 2 turns at a mile and a 16th. So I thought she ran solid, and she'd be much more interesting to me going forward than a horse like Joe would.
Yeah, the 3-year-old races were interesting, but I thought that the races that might have more of an impact on some graded stakes in the future were the 2 races for older horses that we saw among the stakes action on Saturday at Laurel. First up, the Frank Whiteley for the older male horses, won by the very promising Ray Handel-trained Disco Pharaoh, a horse that we had talked about on the Pacecast back on Gotham Week when he broke his maiden by over 19 lengths in the first race of the day at Aqueduct, and some debate on how fast that race should be from a speed figure standpoint. I think you could probably still debate it, but Disco Pharaoh, the winner, he came back and showed that performance was no fluke because he beat a pretty good field here.
Yeah, he got a 119 that day. He got a 116 this day. And to jump right for Maiden Company into this stakes race against some pretty accomplished horses. I know we've talked about Sir Alfred James, who didn't run on this day. Didn't run very well on this day, but he's a solid campaigner along with some others in here. And yeah, his speed figure kind of towered over the field. It was the fastest in the race, and he just won this one easily. So he seems like a really good sprinter who kind of came out of nowhere in that race at Aqueduct, but he exploded here, and I think he's going to be a good one.
Yeah, just the 4th start of his career. He is a 4-year-old, son of American Pharaoh. Clearly took some time to get to the races, but he just debuted last November, was very green in that first start, if you go back and watch it, but subsequently moved forward on synthetic at Turfway. But since they got him back to dirt in his last couple starts, he has just been untouchable, even against this pretty salty stakes field on Saturday at Laurel. This was going 7 furlongs. We'll see how far he ultimately wants to go. Does kind of seem like more of that sprinter miler type, but there would be plenty of options for him if they stuck to those 1-turn races. And he's a pretty exciting runner for a trainer like Ray Handel to have in his barn. Interested to see what they decide to do with him. The final stakes we'll talk about from that Saturday card at Laurel also produced a pretty impressive performance from the winner in the Heavenly Cause, going a mile for the fillies and mares. And Penny Baker making her first start in the U.S., first start for trainer Mike Stidham, and first start on the dirt, produced a pretty dominant performance from her as she traveled well the entire way and put forth a pretty nice turn of foot at the top of the stretch, just slammed the door on this field.
Yeah, I thought this was really impressive. First start here. This was a race I didn't expect to have on the Pacecast this week. I didn't watch it live. I went back and watched the replay, and it's hard not to be impressed. She ran a 111 speed figure, which was better, even a step forward over the Timeform figure she had run over in France on the synthetic track. And yeah, if anything, we learned she's pretty versatile. She's now won on synthetic and dirt. She didn't really run very well on turf, but she took the dirt very well, and she looks like one with a pretty promising future as well. I was impressed even over and above the 111 speed figure when I watched the race visually.
It's kind of funny to look at her career trajectory. 6 starts on the turf, unable to even break her maiden, didn't even get that close to winning many of them. They switched her over to the all-weather in Europe, and now over to dirt, and she's won 5 in a row. As I said, this was her first start on the dirt since coming to the U.S., and looks like a horse that we don't really know what she is yet. I'm not going to be surprised if she turns out to be graded stakes caliber, because this was a visually impressive win. The way that she just ran away from this field once Hevion Toledo pressed the button at the top of the stretch really impressed me. When you see that kind of turn of foot on the dirt, it really kind of makes your eyes open a little bit, and she's got the pedigree to be a nice dirt horse. Kind of makes you wonder why they were running her on the turf in the first place. She's by Medaglia d'Oro, and her dam is a half-sister to Frosted, that Met Mile winner, so definitely bred to be doing what she's doing now, and an exciting horse to have in the barn.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's a replay worth watching because she just runs by him on the outside like the rest of the field standing still. There, she broke from the outside. There was no ground saving. So that's why I said the 111 is probably an underestimate of her ability.
And also just want to give a quick mention to Laurel for putting on a nice card on Saturday. We didn't do much handicapping of it, or at least I didn't, but some big fields, including this one. I mean, it's not like Pennybaker was beating nothing in this race. I mean, this was a 12-horse field with some good stakes-placed runners in behind her. I mean, Field Esprit, who was second, was third in the Barbara Fritchie. Horses like Sharp Star or Miss Leslie, who finished farther back in the pack, are stakes winners. So there were some good horses in here, and didn't really matter because they were not in the same league as this winner, Pennybaker. Craig, let's close things out with a race that you just added to the rundown at the very last minute before we came on to start recording. One race from California this past weekend, the maiden specialweight event from Santa Anita on Saturday, won by the ex-Bob Baffert trained Special Ride, a horse that's a 4-year-old colt, just making the second start of his career, but certainly earned a nice speed figure for a maiden specialweight event.
Yeah, and we say ex-Bob Baffert. I assume he'll probably head back to Bob Baffert after the suspension's over. But yeah, his horses that have transferred barns certainly haven't stopped running, and big effort from him. He had run a 93 first time out. He was bet down to even money that day, didn't really produce in third, but he did on this one as he went off 2-1, ran a 1:14 TimeformUS speed figure. He is a 4-year-old, so he's not like one of those lately raced horses that, has as much upside, but a 1:14 is nothing to sneeze at even for an older horse in his second career start. So this one clearly has some potential. I'll leave the pedigree part to you, though. I don't know. I know I sprung it on you at the last second, how much you've had a chance to look at it.
This horse is pretty well bred. I don't have to look it up. I mean, just from glancing at it, I mean, he's by Candy Ride and the Dam Executive Privilege. You might remember, I believe she was a multiple Grade 1 winner for Mike Pegram and Bob Baffert. I want to say going back like a decade or so. It's hard to remember exactly when these horses ran, but she was a nice 2-year-old filly. And I don't know how many progeny she's had yet, but I think it's interesting. They debuted this horse in a $150,000 maiden claiming race. First time out when he was going out for Bob Baffert as the listed trainer, in a maiden special weight this time in the Sean McCarthy barn, and definitely took a step forward. So we'll see how good this one ultimately turns out to be, but I agree with you. It's not like these horses are falling apart coming out of the Baffert stable. Probably not a big surprise because it does kind of feel like it's a trainer switch in name only. The trainers like Sean McCarthy and Tim Yachtino are taking over, I'm sure, are just kind of maintaining the status quo for all of these horses. So we'll see how they do with more time since the suspension began, how some of these Derby runners do. But certainly the early indications are that you're not supposed to expect a big shift in performance level.
Yeah, and I looked it up since you brought it up. There has been one other sibling, horse named Withholding Info, who went 2 for 3 in 2018 and 2019, winning a maiden special weight and an allowance, and hasn't been heard from since. But obviously had a lot of talent, winning 2 out of 3 with nice speed figures.
Well, Craig, that's it for our recap this week. We will be back for the TimeformUS forecast on Friday. At least I hope I'll be back as long as my voice cooperates. I'm hoping I'll sound a little bit better by then. But Craig, I know you've got an exciting guest lined up to come on then. So looking forward to recording that with you in about 3 days.
Yeah, looking forward to it. We're going to have Mike Maloney joining us. He is kind of the Keeneland czar there. He knows quite a bit about there. I think we'll ask him on Friday. I think he actually has an office there. We had to make sure we schedule it around the race day because he's not going to miss any races from Keeneland. So we'll talk more to Mike on Friday, but a really sharp handicapper, and we'll dive into that then.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. And as Craig previewed, we will be handicapping Keeneland for the forecast on their Saturday card. We'll be doing that on Friday morning, so it should be out a little bit later that afternoon. So definitely something to pay attention to when that comes out on Friday. Everybody, thanks for listening this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Again, thanks for tuning in, and make sure to catch that TimeformUS forecast coming up on Friday.